I think the main thing that we have that fosters community is a couple of couches.
If you're a member of this community, stand up and we'll give you like £100 to do whatever the fuck you want.
And what you will see is the whole world doing your neighborhood dance, and then you will know your power.
Hello and welcome to the Waterstones podcast. I'm Will Rycroft, and in this episode we're going to be exploring the idea of community. We all know that everybody needs good neighbours, but has the internet changed how communities can identify and gather? And how does that online contact compare with good old-fashioned in real life interaction? We'll be hearing from Jason Reynolds, Zing Tsjeng, Amrou Kadhi, and here in the studio we're joined by the award-winning author and bookshop owner, Anne Patchett. Welcome, Anne.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
Do you mind if we start with your bookshop, Anne?
I wish you would.
Because you opened Parnassus Books in Nashville, Tennessee in 2011.
Yes.
First of all, why was it that you wanted to open a bookshop?
I actually didn't want to open a bookshop, but no one else seemed to be doing it. I always say I just didn't want to live in a city without one. Our bookshop had closed. We had an independent called Davis Kid. It had been purchased by a small chain out of Ohio, and it was 30,000 square feet, which is huge. And then we had a Borders, and within 6 months, all the Borders stores closed, and then our Davis Kid closed because the chain ended up closing like 8 of their 10 stores. But the interesting thing was both stores had been profitable every month. So there was basically 60,000 square foot of book selling space in the city where I lived. They both closed through no fault of their own. And nobody stepped up to open a bookstore. Waited. Everyone was talking. Everyone was sad. Finally, I met this woman named Karen Hayes. We were introduced by a mutual friend, and we decided to form a partnership in which I would pay for everything and she would do all the work. And that Karen and I, as partners, would pay a salary to Karen to run the store, and I wouldn't get a salary. And that's, it just happened so fast. We met for the first time on April 30th, 2011, and we opened the store on November 15th of that year.
Wow.
We had no idea what we were doing. And it was like an arranged marriage. It was just crazy.
You, of course, are a firm believer that, as you say, a bookshop is absolutely the heart of a community. And you must see that all the time in your shop as people come in, not just to buy books, but of course you have events all the time, you have author readings, and that's how you've fostered that community. Is that right?
Right. Well, I think the main thing that we have that fosters community is a couple of couches.
Okay.
And people really do just come in and hang out. And that's the lovely thing. If you're going out to dinner with your whole family, you can come by the bookshop for an hour and everyone can sort of split off and do their own thing. And then you can go out. There really isn't another place like that. I mean, yes, I hope you buy a book, but if you don't buy a book, that's absolutely fine. We have several dogs who work in the store, so you can sit with a dog in your lap if you want to. We have story time twice a week. We have a terrific children's section, which is, as you know, the heart and soul of a bookstore. As someone said to me before we opened, if you want customers, you have to raise them yourself.
See, Holly was looking very jealous there with the mention of the dogs, because Holly, you look after the events here at Piccadilly, which of course is a big metropolitan shop. And a lot of people, I think, might think that a shop like that doesn't have the same kind of community feel, but you, through the events, must see communities coming into the shop all the time.
Absolutely, and we have a really nice strand of events, especially sci-fi and young adult events, where we get the same customers coming in, and although they might not have heard necessarily of the authors, they could be debut authors, they really trust the recommendations and the events that we're putting on. So we get the regulars back, and that is what really counts, that they trust our recommendations, that they have that rapport with the booksellers, that they know that what those booksellers are recommending they can buy and know they will enjoy. That's
really brilliant, because sometimes we have a hard time getting people, a good audience in for a first-time debut author. Yeah, so that trust is a huge factor.
But I mean, mention that the dogs will be there, and that will get even more people in.
Really.
That's it. Your event is now sold out.
Let me tell you, my sister just started working at the store a month ago, and she has a congenitally deaf border collie who can jump through a hula hoop. All right? So now we start a lot of our events with Marley Marley Matlin, that's her name,
Okay.
jumping through a hula hoop.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, we've got them lined out the door.
Holly, you've now got a new idea for how to
my
get all
gosh,
events
absolutely.
started.
You have to up your game.
Take Marley on tour.
Let's look at your new book now, and The Dutch House, which I'm supposed to remain sort of relatively impartial and professional as I present this podcast, but I absolutely loved this book.
Thank you.
There are lots of reasons why I loved it, but we should talk first of all about the book as object, because this Waterstones edition of it is something else. It's got these Delft blue sprayed edges, and actually there's a special chapter at the back of the book, isn't there? A little essay that you've written about book cover design and how important it is. Could you tell us a little bit about the design for this book? Because there's a very special story behind it, isn't there?
Yes, and first let me say that it is so important now, book design, the book as a beautiful object, because that's what we have to fight ebooks with. To say this is something that's so beautiful, I want to own it, I want to keep it. So I think that everybody's had to up their game a lot for book design, and this is the prettiest book I've ever had. I think it's the prettiest book anybody's ever had. And the Waterstones edition has just taken it to a whole new level. Just the little extra touches are extraordinary. So when I wrote this book, which is largely about a house, what I knew for certain was that I didn't want a house on the cover or any element of a house, a door, a window, nothing, because it had to exist in the reader's imagination. The best house in the world is going to be different for all of us, so we have to see it in our minds. But in this house, the Dutch house, there is a portrait of the 10-year-old main character, Maeve, and I wanted that portrait to be on the cover. So I thought, well, I'll just look through archival paintings, go to museum websites, I'm sure, to find a pretty little 10-year-old black-haired girl. And I did. I found plenty of them. But the problem was they were all wearing bonnets and pinafores, and it didn't work. And so I had already told my editor that I wanted this portrait on the cover. And I called him and I said, I have a friend in Nashville, Noah Satterstrom, and I think he might be able to paint this painting. I'm going to commission the painting from him. And my editor and the art director said, that's a great idea, but before you contact him, they're in New York, we're going to make up a list of 5 or 6 painters that we want to interview, and then we'll, look at everybody's samples and we'll make a pick. And I got off the phone and thought, oh, that's not going to happen. And so I called Noah and I said, what's the worst thing? I will pay for you to do this painting. Worst thing that happens, it doesn't work and I've bought a painting. No harm done.
Yeah.
That's great. So Noah did this painting in 4 days. I said, I want a 10-year-old girl in a red coat. It has been painted in 1950 in the style of 1910. The painter is Scottish and she's in love with him. Go for it. And 4 days later, he came back with this painting.
In 4 days?
In 4 days. He has 3 tiny children. And he's like, either I do a commission instantly,
right,
or I do it a year from now. And there's nothing in between.
Yeah.
And so he just got on it. And we were friends before, but now we've become very close through all of this. And it's been hysterical because I'll call him up and say, hey, Noah, you're a tote bag now. Now you're a refrigerator magnet. Now you're a roll of wallpaper. And then he'll say, no, you're a tote bag.
That is an extraordinary... So often when you're reading a book, there is that work that the reader does where they will hear a description of a character and you create that vision in your head. And it'll be different for every reader. But you described this character to him and he has created that character. So when you first saw that painting, did it fit the image that you had of Maeve in your head?
The funny thing is I don't really ever have a hard image of anyone in my head. So when I saw the painting, what I thought was, that's perfect. I did not think, oh, he's read my mind, because there wasn't really anything in my mind.
Yeah.
The other thing that's so interesting, Noah still hasn't read the book.
Oh, really?
Okay. He hasn't had time.
Yeah.
And he's really excited about the audiobook because, well, one, Tom Hanks recorded the audiobook, so that's great.
Not too
But
shabby.
he can listen to it while he works. He doesn't have time to read a book.
I know that feeling. Yes.
Don't
that's
we all?
That's so impressive. I mean, it's got a incredible, well, we talk about enigmatic look sometimes in paintings. As you say, this idea of this girl being in love with the person that is painting them, and there is something of that in her extraordinary expression on that cover.
Yes,
it really is.
yes, it really is. It's so perfect. And for the first time in my career, I said, anywhere this book sells in the world, they have to use this painting. I don't care if they just use her left eye. I don't care how they crop it, but it has to be this painting because it's so perfect and it feels so much like a collaboration. The painting is part of the novel. So when you're reading and then you get to the part where Maeve has her portrait painted and you're like, wait a minute. And you go back to the cover and you think, no, this is the painting in the house. And then when I tell people, no, it is actually a painting in my house now. I own it.
Oh,
it's fantastic.
It's very special. We don't want to give away too much about sort of what happens in the novel, but what I was intrigued by was that there are these very the characters, Maeve and her brother, that you really connect to and care about through the course of the novel, and of course their connection to this house, the Dutch house that they used to live in as children. And I wondered which had come first, because the house is so clear, without being too specific, as you say, but so are the characters. And I wondered whether the idea for this book had started with the house itself or with the two characters.
No, with the two characters.
Okay.
And with their circumstances. And then the idea of you have a lot, you have everything, and then you lose it. So it's the money, but then the house becomes the symbol of all of that. When I was writing the book was going to be called Maeve, because to me it is completely a story about Maeve. And then about halfway through I thought it's going to be called Maeve or the Dutch House, like Dr. Fisher of Geneva or The Bomb Party, that sort of two-tiered title that everyone hates. And then by the time I finished, I thought, I know they're going to make me call it the Dutch House, so why don't I just be gracious and say it's called the Dutch House? It's memorable, it's clear. It works really well because they're the same number of letters in Dutch and house. And I actually think about all of that.
You're very considerate author, trying to help the poor designer.
Or I'm a smart bookseller, because you know how it is? There are some titles you cannot remember to save your life.
It's true.
From books that you love. A book that I love so passionately, The Constellation of Vital Phenomenon by Anthony Mara. I begged him to change the title of that book. I said, it's sitting in my lap, and I can't, the manuscript, and I can't remember the title of it. But there you go.
He just wouldn't change it.
No, actually, what he said was, that's so interesting. My father told me the same thing last night, that he can't remember the name of the book. And he called the publisher and he said, nobody can remember it. We should change it. And they said, no, we love it.
See?
Yeah, it is the best book ever.
Okay. Well, there you go. We've got our first book recommendation already.
Oh, we can do that all day long.
Yes. And we will.
Okay.
As I said, I absolutely love The Dutch House, and I would implore anybody listening to read the book. It really is. It's sort of... It's very emotional, there's just so much to enjoy there. We're going to stay in America for the moment, because we're going to hear from another novelist and poet, in fact, Jason Reynolds. He writes primarily for a young adult audience, and he's created the 4 books that make up a series called Run, and there's an extraordinary novel in verse that he wrote, which is called Long Way Down, which combines guilt and loyalty and the thirst for revenge as a young man makes his way down a lift to sort of exact revenge after a shooting. And I wanted to ask him about what community meant to him as a Black American.
Community as a Black American means an awful lot to me. So my identity is sort of connected and rooted in the idea of community, specifically as it pertains to Black Americans, and specifically as it pertains to Black Americans within the context of our history. There is no such thing as a Black Lives Matter movement without sort of the Black Power movement, the Black Arts movement, the Civil Rights movement, the Harlem Renaissance, slave revolts, right? Like this is a continuum. I think that my community is oftentimes thought about as being tied to struggle, but it isn't just tied to struggle, right? It's that within that struggle, a struggle that we never asked for, but that has existed for as long as we have been in that particular country. That struggle has been glue for us. It has been a binding agent to create what I like to believe is one of the strongest cultures on earth, one of the most formidable grouping of people, only because we have been unbeaten. You know, I get to work as a writer, yet I am a descendant of a people who were never supposed to know how to read. You know, the great Lucille Clifton has a famous quote in a poem in which she so famously says, you know, won't you come celebrate with me, for every day of my life, something has tried to kill me and has failed. When I look at my mother, I think of community. When I think of my siblings, I think of community, my friends, my neighborhood. When I think of music, that my music that has traveled the world and has changed the course of the earth, right? The strongest youth movement on earth is a music that was created in black and brown ghettos in America, right? And it isn't the first time that has happened, right? It happened in the 1970s with rock and roll. It happened in the 1940s with blues. It happened with jazz. I mean, it's happened over and over and over again. So when we talk about community, I think for me, I am swollen with pride. And I don't necessarily only think of it as this weight, this sort of burden that black people have been forced to carry. But I think of it as a beauty that that through that burden has made us the shiniest people on earth. And I'll always hold my head up when I think of what it means to be a part of such an incredible community and such a momentous history. It's super important that we see a broad and vast representation of who we are, because I think that the dangerous thing that has happened over time is that because we have been wiped out, because we have been sort of forced into anonymity when it comes to musics like rock and roll and like blues and jazz, we believe that it isn't ours. We believe that we somehow believe the lie that we are a monolithic culture, when the truth is that we've always been polylithic. We've always contained multitudes. And now with young kids growing up, they realize like, no, I can play rock and roll. I can make any kind of music, any kind of art that I want. There can be a Donald Glover, right? And I can be as sort of abstract and creative and interesting as I choose. I could be, you know, what some call alternative black, which is not a thing. It's just a segment of blackness, right? I could be that version of blackness, or I can be Issa Rae and be the awkward black girl, right? And because that's also a part of who we are. Or I could be, you know, I could make a TV show like Power in America, which is about black gangsters, because we can do that as well. Or I can make movies like the Black Panther and star in those movies, and I can direct those movies, and I can write those movies, and I can star in those movies, and they can be the biggest thing on earth. Or I could be Jordan Peele and produce an independent film like Get Out, which is political satire, and shift an entire conversation, right? Or I can be Ta-Nehisi Coates and write a political essay, which is basically a rewriting of an essay written before when James Baldwin wrote Letter to My Nephew 50 years, 60 years before, and revamp an entire conversation that the world has been terrified to have. Or I can be Bryan Stevenson and write about the history of lynching in America, right? And show that history is something that is spread all around the world. Or I could be Ava DuVernay and write movies about our people, right, and turn them into cinematic masterpieces. This isn't some sort of, you know, crackerjack box film shot on an iPhone, even though if we did that too, it would be just as beautiful. It's an incredible time. It's an incredible time, and I'm excited to see what young people coming up today, what they do with it. I mean, I tell kids all the time, if you want to know your influence, if you want to know your power, you know, if I'm in Harlem, or if I'm in Brooklyn, or if I'm in Chicago, I say, think about whatever your favorite dance is at the moment. And then I want you to go on YouTube and you type it in. And after you type the name of that dance in, I want you to put a space and then type in any country that you think of. And what you will see is the whole world doing your neighborhood dance. And then you will know your power.
The thing that struck me through that is the importance of him talking about representation in communities, and for young people especially to be able to see people that they can relate to find those aspirations. He's just amazing.
He's incredible. I mean, I've heard him speak a few times, and every time I hear him, I come away galvanised. Even though I'm not really part of his community, I suppose, but I find what he was saying about that completely inspiring, and he was talking about the art and the culture that I have been consuming over the last few years and have absolutely loved. So in fact, I can be part of that. We can all be part of enjoying that.
Yes, and I think that that's really such an important point, that we can... consume is not the right word, but to appreciate and to learn from art without necessarily saying, this is art that I'm going to make, but that is art that I'm going to stand in front of and warm my hands in front of and learn from and grow from and appreciate. And it's a beautiful, beautiful piece.
He was saying that thing as well about this idea of communities coming out of struggle, which I found really interesting, because that does often seem to be the case. If I think about the distinct communities that exist in the UK, they are often bound together through struggle or resistance or making their voices heard. But I suppose the point he was trying to make was that they don't want to be defined by the struggle. They want to transcend that and to sort of represent themselves in a more successful way once the struggle is over.
Yes.
Does that make sense?
I think that of course makes perfect sense. And I'm also sitting here thinking it's really important to not say, and this was my struggle, because really I didn't have one. What I think is I come from a long line of people who haven't struggled, and that so often what we do in the face of that is sort of create struggle so that we feel like I can come to the table in this conversation. And I don't feel that way at all. I just feel like I want to sit with it and appreciate it, be respectful and grateful. Yeah.
One of the things that you have done so brilliant at Parnassus Books is to have there's events with authors bringing in, and we know that they can sort of provide a venue for communities to gather those events, and they sort of, you find your like-minded individuals, whether it's because you read a similar genre of fiction or something like that. Earlier this year at Waterstones, it was the month of Pride celebrations, which happened at various parts of the country through the month, and we had an amazing event here which was hosted by Amelia Abraham. She has a book called Queer Intentions, which is sort of a personal history of queer culture, and we're going to hear a clip from that event where, in fact, we're going to hear the host, Sean Fay, speaking with the writers Zing Tsjeng and Amrou Kadhi. And what they're actually doing is to question whether their community has been hijacked by brands and sort of big businesses getting involved with something like Pride. So let's hear what they have to say.
And yeah, I mean, I think this is something that is now increasingly this meta discussion every year amongst when Pride in London happens. And on the way here, I was like, I'm feeling so clapped, I'm so tired. No, like, I'm loving it now. And I went to Sainsbury's because I was like, I'm going to smoke for the first time in ages because I need strength. And they were like, we're proud to welcome members of the LGBT plus community to Sainsbury's. And I was like, thank you. I'll have 20 Marlboro Lights. But how do you all feel around the question of pride? I guess all three of you live in London and work in London. You're all working on stuff that's probably a little bit antagonistic or interacting with people that probably have an issue with pride, at least Pride in London, the main one. And I'm just wondering what your experiences of pride are and whether or not you think, it and the discourse around it is a good thing.
Oh, I mean, I also want to add that on the way here I went to M&S and I saw the LGBT sandwich. Yeah, it's disgusting. It's like lettuce, tomato, bacon, guacamole. What? That's horrible. Also, can I just say that amongst, like, if I were to point to a community as being the most vegetarian-friendly one, it would be the LGBTQ community. So why would you put bacon in a sandwich? It's also not halal. It makes it not halal. Okay, anyway, I didn't buy it. It looked horrible. And I honestly thought it was a marketing stunt that M&S had done. I didn't realize they were actually making people buy it. I have really complicated feelings about Pride because I do think in London it's become incredibly corporatized and commercialized. But I mentioned earlier that I grew up in Singapore, which also has its version of a Pride parade, but because in Singapore assemblies of more than 6 people are considered illegal protests, It's a gathering called Pink Dot, so people gather all dressed in pink to form a massive dot to then demonstrate the strength in numbers of the LGBTQ community in the country. And there was a whole big thing about how Google and Facebook were sponsoring Pink Dot because none of the local Singaporean companies wanted to do it. So this was the only way they could have it up and running. But then the Singapore government was like, these are Western companies interfering with this Asian country. We're going to ban foreign investment in Pink Dot. So I think it's really complicated. I think it's all about context, really. In some countries, like I think in Singapore, it's been enormously helpful to have that kind of corporate support because there was no way it was ever going to get that kind of support from the government. But then in places like London, I think, we really have to look at how Pride's become so commercialized in the same way that, International Women's Day has become so commercialized and wonder, what is the point? What are we actually trying to say here?
Yeah, I'm similar. I have really conflicted feelings about critiquing Pride because I grew up in the Middle East and I couldn't even wear something with a pink stitch without getting a look. So to be able to even have a conversation where we analyze if it's too visible feels obviously a privilege. And compared to what my life was like before I was in the UK, I came when I was 11, but to me I was excited when I just saw someone's arm, a man's arm on screen. I'd be like, that's queerness. I was just so I feel. But I think some of the issues are. Firstly, I saw Coots with Pride last year. Yeah, Coots, the bank where you need half a million to join.
Queen's Bank.
Queen's Bank.
Her personal account is at Coots. She's never accessed it. She doesn't have a bank card. I know that.
I think corporate support, it needs to be interrogated. Is it sponsor? I'll Wagamama have it. I don't know. Udon noodles haven't really helped me so much in my coming out. But I would love to know whether the proceeds towards what they're earning go to LGBTQIA charities. If they do, then I think I'm okay with them having visibility at Pride. It becomes more polemical when things like British Airways or Virgin that were complicit in deporting LGBTQIA plus asylum seekers also sort of get kind of congratulated for being part of the parade. And actually, I think that kind of then resists us properly interrogating what that institution is doing. So I think a lot of politically problematic institutions come to Pride and therefore we give them a kind of get out of jail free card and we don't really interrogate what's going on. And there were UKIP once.
Yeah, 2015, yeah.
What? So that is where it becomes, I think, problematic. And the third thing I'd say is also in terms of what's happening for queer people, the amount of offers all my LGBTQI friends get for Pride, will you come and hold this vitamin water? Can't pay you, but it's going to be great for your reach. And it's well, you're going to be making loads of money. So I think if you want to, I think you just need to pay queer people a lot.
Actually, so I get asked a lot because I work at Vice from the commercial team. Oh, what can we do because this brand wants to insert something here friendly to this insert community here, whether it's women or ethnic minorities. And I always go back and I tell them, just start giving out money. Just be if you're a member of this community, stand up and we'll give you £100 to do whatever the fuck you want. And they never take me up on it. It's mysterious.
There was something really interesting, because that idea of critiquing something like corporate sponsorship of an event like Pride, and Amrou Kadhi there was saying, I get that, but also we are so lucky to have this, to be able to have an event like Pride, having come from the Middle East himself and been through that sort of experience and seeing the difference in cultures. We do have to be careful, don't we, as communities, to sort of not be too hard on ourselves and on other people, and to realise what freedoms we do have.
Yes, and I also think, again, there are moments when I think I don't have a say on this. I mean, not even an opinion other than deference. And I'm not playing it safe here. That comes from the deepest part of my heart. I have respect and I have deference, and I am saying, what in the world would I have to say except I hope for all people that they get to define themselves and their quests and their needs, and they get, therefore, the respect that they deserve.
Which is kind of what Zing was saying at the end there, which is, if you want to be involved in this event, then give us the money. Let us decide how we want to spend it, rather than you trying to get a nice photograph of us holding your product and sort of co-opting, I suppose, that community in order to sell your stuff, which is what I suppose it can often feel like.
Right.
And I thought it was really interesting, that idea of not looking closely enough at what brands do through their day-to-day business as opposed to their sort of corporate sponsorship and marketing of their business. What are they hiding by kind of sticking a rainbow flag on their product?
Right.
It's a tricky. It was a really interesting event, that one, actually, and there was so many bits I could have included from it because it was such a wide-ranging discussion, but I think a really good example of how a book event in a bookshop can sort of start off talking about one thing but can just develop into covering so many things, and you must have that all the time in your shop.
Yes, and we have certain conversations about whether or not to invite certain authors. I wonder if you guys have this thing going on too, where there is someone who has a book out and that book contains all sorts of ideas that we in the store disagree with.
Right.
So is that person welcome to come and have an event in the store? Or do we say, no, you're not welcome? That's a tricky one.
It's a very tricky one. I mean, presumably you, as an independent bookshop, get to make very independent decisions about that kind of thing?
Super independent.
Well, there you go.
Right.
Is it up to the dogs? Do they get to decide?
But often I'll be in the store and our marketing director and people in the back room are having these discussions, and they'll say, what do you think about this event? Should we have this person come in? And by which I mean people who are severely right-wing.
Right.
That's the thing that we struggle with. And, my rule of thumb is no. I get to say no. That's just up to me. And if someone wants us to special order a book, we will special order a book. I can't imagine a circumstance under which I would say, no, we won't get this book. We might not carry the book, but I would get the book for you if you wanted to special order it. But if it's something that seems lodged in hate and someone wants to come and have an event at the store, plenty of people have events about things that are not my cup of tea or I don't necessarily agree with. But if it's straight up hate, I get to say that. I get to define it for my bookstore and say, no, we're going to pass.
That makes perfect sense to me. You're the bookseller, you get to decide which books you sell. And as you say, you wouldn't censor anything. So if they want to order a book, you can bring it in, but you're not necessarily going to make an effort to promote it.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. We're going to hear from our booksellers now, in fact, actually. So what we do at the end of each episode is to travel around the country and to get bookseller recommendations based on whichever theme we're talking about. So here we are with their book recommendations based on this idea of community.
Hi, I'm Lucy Hounsome from Exeter, and a great book to read about community would be Sanctuary by V.V. James. Described as Big Little Lies with witches, Sanctuary paints a brilliant portrait of small-town America, where a murder investigation spirals out of control, ripping apart the close-knit community. As friendships fail, succumbing to rumour and prejudice, a Crucible-style witch hunt ravages the town until there is nowhere for the truth to hide. But what is the truth? And are we prepared to face it? You'll have to read the book to find out.
I'm Martha from Sheffield, and the book I'd like to recommend on the theme of community is Under Milkwood by Dylan Thomas. I first discovered it when I was in my teens, and I just completely fell in love with this eccentric, funny, warm cast of characters and the village community that Thomas creates. It's completely unforgettable.
Hi, I'm Katrina from Glasgow. My recommendation on the subject of community is a play by Rona Munro called Bold Girls. I think the reason that I love this book and the sense of community in it is because it's about people from a working class background. I read this as a teenager, and it's about women in Northern Ireland during the Troubles and the community they find on their street, and it was just so refreshing for me to read about that type of community and friendship that I hadn't seen represented anywhere else.
So there we go, some fantastic book recommendations. We had one from you earlier, Anne, so thank you for that. And thank you for The Dutch House. Again, I can't thank you enough for that book. It's been one of my most joyous reading experiences this year.
And I can't thank you enough for taking it and making it so gorgeous. That Waterstones edition blows my mind.
I would love to take the credit for that. I wouldn't dare. We, of course, as ever, would love to hear from you listening, especially if you have suggestions for themes that you would like to hear us covering in Season 3. That's right, we want to hear what you would like to hear us talking about. You can do that by emailing us on social@waterstones.com. And of course, if you're enjoying our podcast, then do please make sure that everyone in your community knows about it. Next week, the enigmatic title of Meetings gives us the chance to hear from Malcolm Gladwell, Sally Rooney and Arundhati Roy. But until then, from all of us here, goodbye.
Goodbye.
Goodbye.